What would happen with a lot of black families, they would get married in the church in the township, but
Right.
because there's really nothing, like no area with any kind of scenery or anything pretty, so they would drive through town after the ceremony, and then they would take the photographs here at the golf course. Because you could kind of go and stand in the summer. It's all green and lush and pretty, right? So they would go and stand here and take photographs. And anyway, his daughter got married on a Saturday. And they're taking their photographs and everything. And I think they ended a little late. And in the summer, it gets dark really late, like 8 o'clock. Yeah. So they finished the photographs and everything, and it was getting to the curfew siren time. Right. So they drove out. And I think they got to about here, and their car broke down. And they had like 10 minutes. And he said that in their suits and everything, like they jumped out of here and they pushed that car to get over that line by 9, because otherwise they would have been like arrested on the day of his daughter's wedding.
Well, the legacy of apartheid still remains, even in 2017. Even after 23 years of supposed freedom, we're still seeing the after effects of, the apartheid.
As I look down to my future, I saw a rich man eating fare as he spent all his money.
It was a vicious, violent system of oppression, and it was deliberately constructed and as a system to keep the black people of this country oppressed.
But now a rich man, what the money's done to him.
Separate governing structures, separate social structures, separate churches, separate political structures, separate economic structures, and so on.
Wanna be a thief, and he goes on to do the best he can for mama.
I grew up in the dusty streets of Elsie's River, a place where they murdered 4 people on one day in the morning. And tonight, we won't even talk about it anymore because we got used to it.
Clouds of white are in the air.
In 2015, South African President Jacob Zuma cut funding to South Africa's higher education programs.
I would caution against
resulting in millions of young South Africans no longer able to afford university tuitions. Outraged, the nation's youth rallied behind a movement coined "Fees Must Fall" and protested throughout South Africa.
Fees must fall. Yes, that movement was about how even in 2017, after so many years, the black child is still unable to access education, like tertiary education.
As the movement radicalized, protesters took aim at European influence, tearing down statues and cutting off the nose of English entrepreneur Cecil Rhodes. Decolonization quickly became a popular theme to South Africans who feel their heritage, land, and culture have been ransacked by European settlers during the apartheid era. The cross-sectionality between Jacob Zuma betraying the ANC, the legacy of apartheid, and the injustices being dealt to the born-free generation brought about some of the brightest people in South Africa to ask the question, where do we go from here, and what is a peaceful democratic solution?
Apartheid
would be what you would recognize as legalized racial segregation. So we had white schools, Indian schools, colored schools, black schools. And colored in this country does not mean black, it means mixed race. People of a mixed race descent. These areas contained the schools, they contained the living areas, the social areas. You know, there was some movement across the areas, but in general, your living spaces were segregated.
They created a secret organization called the Broederbond. So then members of the Broederbond then got elected into parliament. You would always know that the minister in the church, the principal of the school, a lawyer, medical doctor, so all the prominent people within the society will be recruited to become part of the secret organization. And then that filtered out. And that was basically how apartheid developed into such a, you know, I don't want to call it a successful system, because it was just too violent and too for that. But I mean that's the plan they had.
Lately my words have made a turn and finally learned that being burned, it kinda hurts. Sometimes it's worse than what you think it is. These people kind of ditch their life to criticize the man that tries his hardest will, that will survive this life so happily.
There was a racial civil war going on here. 10% of the population, whites, had been controlling the levels of politics and economics and society and culture for, you know, you could say almost 350 years, but certainly for the last 50 years.
During apartheid, citizen movements were monitored by a government-issued passbook.
I fondly remember how I saved the lives of 2 American journalists.
Being in the wrong territory after a certain time resulted in immediate fines, jail time, or worse.
When they were cornered, I arrived on the scene and with my squad car, and now the police told them you have 2 minutes to leave the area. And being on foot and not knowing the area and being in a very, very hot spot those days, you know, at that time, I said to them, jump into my car. And they jumped in with their equipment and stuff, and I took them out of the area and actually saved them from being arrested and also saved them from being stoned to death, because at that time the people were up in arms against the state and they want to change, and they want to change immediately. And it doesn't matter where you come from, whether you're from Australia or the United States, if you were white, you were just taboo, because that was the cause of the problems in South Africa.
We have at last achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people.
In 1994, apartheid officially ended, led by the iconic political leader Nelson Mandela.
From the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination.
He was a bad terrorist, and he's a communist, and he's against the Christian religion, and he wants to take everything away from the whites, and he hates the whites.
I'm not prepared to talk to people who want revolutionary change.
If Mandela were to say that he wanted constitutional change?
He does not want it. He's stated it all over and over again, and he's in jail because he made he took certain steps that which overstepped the mark as far as legislation.
That's the picture that was created for me, and I got the opportunity to meet with him as well. He turned to be quite the opposite.
Sitting in the corner and my back might be against the wall. Run out and caught me and my boys just might be playing ball. All I know, all he knows is that I'm gonna get this paper. tall.
He studied law at the University of the Witwatersrand and practiced law. And then, as an angry young man, he came back into the country and tried to persuade the leadership to move to armed struggle. And that struggle was against the background of him saying that for all these years, the peaceful means that we've employed have been met with violence. And if one looks at Sharpeville, where 69 people were shot, he was saying enough is enough. We need to fight fire with fire. He disappeared from public view for 27 years into jail. And sitting in that jail over that period, he decided that you need to tame the tiger, in the sense understand how the tiger worked. So he learnt the Afrikaans language. His moral authority in jail was recognized even by his jailers. And Robben Island became something of a university where there was an exchange of ideas of many of the people who were brought together in how to move forward.
So his first challenge was to bring the black voice together. His second challenge was to do it in such a way that you're not gonna push the white people aside. And he is one of the few people that actually was able to negotiate that in-between space, which was remarkable.
South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country.
We were actually taught by Nelson Mandela to put the past behind us. At that time, one could sense the feeling of freedom, the feeling of living in a free South Africa, being free as a human being. No more shackles around the ankles, no more hindrances, no more arrests.
You know, when he was jailed, we were denied a lot of that knowledge. It wasn't something that occupied the press. You know, you wouldn't have had any kind of critical.
What were you told about?
We were basically told that he was a criminal who wanted to blow up and hurt civilians of the state, wanted to blow up various state structures, undo the government, disrupt public life, hurt people, kill people, maim people, whatever it took to undo the political system. Mandela was released early in February of 1990.
Dion gets up, I turn the cameras off, and me and John waited probably 10 minutes, and then she came back into the room and said one of my students was just killed in a township.
Gilwa, who hails from Queenstown in the Eastern Cape, was set to return to the university next semester after he was suspended for his involvement in protests following the Shimla Park incident. UFS SLC President Sikhululekile Luwaka says it is sad to have lost a great student leader that he served alongside, especially given the fact that he was assisting the underprivileged in the community in the Western Cape while on his suspension.
The radio announced that one of Dion's students was stabbed, supporting greater access to education.
My little mess is true. I've never been for room. My good friend once taught me. I keep dreaming you will see. Oh, stay away from all the sadness. Oh, stay away from all the strain. Oh, stay away from all the sadness. Oh, stay away from all the strain.
Philia died July 15th, 2017. I had been in South Africa for 2 weeks and have learned much about the apartheid system. Thalila's death was no history lesson. It was very tragic, it was very real. A reminder of the condition which South Africa's born-free generation find themselves in, both economically and socially. My interview shifted from understanding the past to envisioning a future. How would the demands of the youth be resolved? A complex question with complex solutions. Among the answers given were to uproot colonization, free higher education, a charismatic leader. Lastly, encourage English to become the unofficial primary language, a move that lowers the prestige and influence of the Afrikaans language. We start there. What would the dismantling of a language do to alleviate these economic and social issues?
If you are to talk to any Afrikaner, they can be able to trace their primordial identity to either being German, being French, being Dutch, actually being English. So over time, is that they constructed this kind of identity of the Afrikaner, but then to be able to actualize it within the Eurocentric kind of model, those people had to have a language.
That language that was developed out of the early Dutch became known as Afrikaans. And so those people left and went into the interior because they did not want to live under English and British rule. They wanted to rule themselves.
And that is how Afrikaans actually gained currency in much of the 20th century. And then, incidentally, that these people had a land to call their own, which is present-day South Africa. The higher education sector is one of the most constitutive sectors in the sense that it creates a society's elite or prime labor force. Consequently, if language becomes a variable in the access of higher education, then to a great extent actually what you're trying to do is that you're trying to determine who can be able to play an active role in elite sectors of the economy or elite sectors of society.
Is a problem because the majority of the economic power is still in white hands, and therefore though the whites have lost political power, it didn't really have any influence on their everyday lives because they have the economic power.
Most of the Afrikaners who are living in South Africa, they don't even know how to speak a black language. And they've been here since they're since they were 4 generations back, and they haven't even picked up, a language that they would say look, since we're living in Capetown, we're going to speak Xhosa, or we are living in Bloemfontein, they only speak English, Afrikaans, and even the English is not that good.
The vast majority of undergraduate students are black, and the vast majority of the faculty body of the professors are white and Afrikaans and male.
What Afrikaans has done in this part of the world is that it has privileged access to higher education to speakers of Afrikaans.
If you're going to have a dual language system, this means that you run both languages in the class. This means that you have English Afrikaans or English Sotho or whatever in the same class. And you do part of the class in English and part of the class in Afrikaans.
Or 2 separate classes, and you have economics 1 Afrikaans and economics 1 English.
Yeah, so that's a parallel system, which is what we have now. And then the price that you're going to pay is segregation. And that segregation is going to be racial. Segregation is not together, and separate is never equal. So you're going to sit with this persistent problem. It's never going to go away.
Bright blue eyes got me staring at my feet. Long blonde hair got this song stuck on repeat. I don't care what the hell you people think about me.
No politics is going to take away Afrikaans, right? So nobody's going to stop this. This is this is our land. This is South African land. All right. So Afrika sal nooit doodgaan nie.
For starters, they benefited from a system that exploited the rest of the population. Then they get a public education in a language that is their mother tongue. I mean, really, it's a question of double subsidization.
We all have the right to study in our own language, and I feel it's a fight that we have to stand for. We can't just stand back and let them do whatever they want to do.
What Apartheid managed to do was to create a welfare state for a few on the basis of race. The dynamics of dispossession cannot get more insidious than that.
Trample on minorities in South Africa, like Afrikaans-speaking people, and we believe that minority groups also have a right to be taught in their own language like Afrikaans.
They don't want to talk the truth. Why? Because, to a larger extent, they're beneficiaries of the retention of the status quo.
Now the push for English language only. To be competitive in a world market on a globalized planet, the language of trade, commerce, and education is English.
It's easier to just channel everyone into learning by English because there's so many languages, but there's still this whole backlog of what's going to happen with our mother tongue. So that's where I think your parents need to play an influence in teaching you how to speak your mother tongue and how to write it. That's where parents need to step in, But at school, English should be the way to go.
I'm still loving you, and I know one thing we should do, and I know I'm still loving you.
Our guides take us to the ivy-covered halls of the highly respected University of Capetown. This prestigious varsity is not immune to the student protests. Scars of burnt asphalt mark the site where historically significant and valuable artistic paintings were put to flame. Flyers of Marxist solidarity are stapled to bulletin boards outside the library.
Some of the gains of the last 20 odd years in the democratic dispensation has been the spread of mass education. That we have got to concede. There's been spread of mass education. Now, what that has managed to do is that we have got first generation university graduates in certain kind of families where previously that did not happen.
We are able to stay in the suburbs, we are able to go to schools with white people and other races as well. And we are able to travel abroad, things like that. And internet access, we are sort of like, we also as Black people now have the advantage, sort of like the advantage that white people have. Yeah, so we are sort of like catching up to that level.
So the vast majority of South Africans are living in similar, if not worse conditions in some cases than what it was previously. And now we've got unemployment officially of 25%, unofficially of 36%, and youth unemployment of over 50%. So you can imagine 50% of the 18 to 35-year-olds in South Africa are sitting at home unemployed.
The basic education, the primary, secondary education is not recovered from the apartheid education system, which was highly, highly unequal.
The problem is access. It's not about being able to succeed necessarily. It's not being able to have the intellectual capital. It's not at all that. It is the fact that segregation is so harsh. show me how many universities are located in the center of townships.
Confronting the opinions and voices of the white intelligentsia is becoming common. J.C. Vander Merwe and Thierry Lusher both recounted events where they were asked to speak, soon confronted by shouts and accusations from the audience questioning their ethos.
That anger that is directed towards me, but not towards me as a person, as JC, but towards me representing white privilege. But I can make that distinction.
So it sparked those debates about what are we as universities doing to transform towards campuses that foster equality and freedom and dignity for people who are there, people who work there, people who pass through there, who study there, and who have anything to do with the university. And eventually we had Fees Must Fall emerging from that, and that was a very big movement, strong movement, push for free tertiary education.
SRC has failed to resolve the ongoing Fees Must Fall protest.
Fees Must Fall campaign.
What we all now know is the Fees Must Fall campaign.
Falling back on the Fees Must Fall student movement.
Fees Must Fall movement coming into light again today as students at the University of Capetown stormed a hall that was filled with students writing exams and clashed with police outside Parliament. Well, the same question is being asked nationwide. Will fees actually fall?
Will they eventually fall? I don't think they will.
You know, the glib answer is to say, well, if we didn't have such a huge amount of corruption going on, that could be a possibility to channel huge sums of money into dealing with access for people to get to higher education.
If we put a whole lot of money into Fees Must Fall and making sure that fees do fall and that we do get free tertiary education, what are going to happen to all the other sectors? Where are they going to get money? You know, are we going to increase taxes? Our health system is not well. Housing, infrastructure, superstructure, all those things, they still need to be attended to.
It might be that I'm paying 100 or 200 rand more a month. But if a lot of people, if 2 or 3 million people do that, because I don't think to look at big business and to say, right, so what are you going to do to change this? Now, I don't think it might make a difference, but I mean, I'm not putting my money on that, you know.
Things are coming to light. So the conversations are being had, the right conversations. But we are slowly making some sort of progress.
Let me tell you about the story of my life. You wanna know the story of my life?
I think that the youth need to take the future into their own hands, which Mandela said himself. The future is in your hands, it's in the youth's hands. I think the youth needs to stand up now and speak for itself, and to speak for all South Africans, but in a way which Mandela articulated. I think the youth's anger coming out at the moment is almost a radicalization of the frustration that they feel.
So please don't judge me.
The black youth are at this stage very angry. Look where my parents are still living, you know. They lived in this house under apartheid. They're still living here, especially in the rural areas, and nothing has happened. So that's where that more radical voice come out and say, you know what, now, we've gone through the reconciliation, but we didn't become violent towards white people. We have nothing to show for that.
Rooms are green and yellow walls. Where I grew up, it was all so tall.
Kailicha is a township, Yes, there is poverty, but there is infrastructure in place to move out of said poverty. There are paved roads, electricity, and streetlights, a connection to the mass transit system of Greater Capetown, and multiple schools. After being patted down for weapons, we enter Club Rand, a popular night spot, open-aired but complete with a DJ, cleaning crew, clearing away baskets of meals from the on-property butcher and braai. Patrons are well-dressed and ready to enjoy the night, dancing at their tables and sofas, mingling and laughing freely. Formal rules of segregation have passed, yet citizens seem to remain in their historically designed districts. Black Africans continue to live in black townships, colored citizens in mixed communities such as Mitchell's Plain, and whites in their zones.
But what did the white people do after apartheid? To show that they really want to be part of creating this new, vibrant constitutional democracy where we can all live together. Did they make any sacrifice? No, they don't even want to acknowledge the benefits from that system. So I can understand that frustration.
A lot of the Born Free generation movements, whether they're political or social movements, believe in flat leadership. They don't believe in hierarchical leadership. They are not enamored with leaders who posture and politic for personal gain.
We need the creative genius or the creative geniuses of everybody in South Africa to be able to put on the table ideas about the future of this country.
Activistic together, taking the same hits for the movement, taking the same responsibilities, being accountable to the normal people, the public, being accountable to members of the movement, where you don't have these kind of untouchables at the top who make decisions and, everything is kind of designed and decided by consensus and discussion of everyone together in a room.
They're taking agency and they say, listen, so I'm not waiting for a leader. I can't trust the ANC anymore in terms of saying they'll fix this for us. So you know what? I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my thing. And they do it in startup businesses. They do it in NGOs, and they do it in the formal economic sector. And some of them are going into politics, saying, but you know what? We're going to fix this thing. And that is something that encouraged me on a daily basis.
Having been elected as president of this mighty union, Western Province is a feather in my cap. I come through the doldrums, I come through the struggles in life, and today I sit in the boardroom controlling and leading a multi-million rand franchise. This is how much South Africa has changed.
Port Elizabeth hugs the coast of the Indian Ocean. We dine at Natty's Thai Cafe. Mark, the chilled-out surfer and laid-back waiter, is husband to Natty, cigarette-smoking owner and details matter chef of the locally adored restaurant. South African national Mark met Thailand-born Natty during a rotation in Israel, fulfilling apartheid's obligatory military service. They married and eventually opened the cafe. During a discussion with 3 local women of similar age, Gunnar asked about post-apartheid conditions in South Africa. A trio member declared, "You're looking at it." One black South African, one self-proclaimed colored of Asian descent, one white who declared herself of English heritage, all 3 stood together, shoulder to shoulder, embracing each other.
I'm an African. I mean, this is what I know. This is where I was born, and this is the birthplace of humanity. And I think we lost a bit of that spirit and we lost a bit of that humaneness, and I think we have to reclaim it back, but this time we have to do it to say that there's, you know, if we talk about reconciliation, we can't talk about it without social justice.
One of the differentiators between why nations fail and why nations succeed, meaning why some societies succeed and why some societies fail, is about entrenching of institutions and more so institutions of governance.
I think we're moving into a very fragmented future, and I don't feel that that's a bad thing.
The way society is organized, anyway, to a larger extent derives from people's creative genius, if you may. That is about ideas.
There will be a revival, you know, and truly speaking, if we get the politics right in South Africa can and will be a powerhouse in that respect.
I carry whatever my colonial or apartheid ancestors might or might not have done, whether they did it themselves or whether their people did it. And I don't think that shying away from that kind of accountability is going to help anyone.
I do believe that those that will follow in our footsteps must take this beautiful thing forward, and that is to cement relationships between the various race groups.
In modern South Africa or contemporary South Africa, like any other state, then you'd want to rely on universities or higher education institutions to be able to provide you those kind of radical ideas about how it is that we solve the problems of the day.
People should have freedom, and freedom to me means being able to do what it is that you want to do. Without fear.
Part of the problem that South Africa is facing today, and you'll never read this anywhere, because you try to publish this, it will never get published, because then it gets shut down in peer review, is that the South African Academy remains untransformed deep into the second decade of the 21st century.
Look, we need to get a lot of black people, black students in classrooms and actually studying further than their matric. That's what I really want to happen.
So my hope for the future would be that we just move into a very honest, accountable way of dealing with each other, where you have some kind of understanding of humanity and the commonality that brings.
Cooperation, commitment, strong relationships, understand each other for what you are and who you are. Work with each other as if he or she is your own brother and sister.
One of the greatest challenges in the current century for South Africa will be to completely dismantle networks of privilege generally and networks of white privilege in South African higher education.
I'm not of the older generation that looks at the younger generation and says, you know, when we were kids, we didn't act like that, because I very much see that I co-created this reality.
When we win the World Cup again in 2023, we will be stronger.
Discuss and see a way forward with the whole Fees Must Fall issue.
We don't have diversity.
A shift in ideology.
That which thrusts me into the jaws of death is also that which offers me the chance to be reborn. One generation after the deconstruction of apartheid and the implementation of a conscious choice among the citizenry to pursue reconciliation, there is a raw sensitivity that at times felt palpable concerning the politics of the country. There is also a sincere optimism that the worst has already passed and the future of the nation is one of ascendance.
I put on my crimson red shirt. I've heard that it works, I know that it's ugly inside, but I try. I've been nice the most of my life. I know it gets harder in time. I'm mad at the people outside talking loud.
We are now in Bloemfontein, heading to see a giant statue of Nelson Mandela. Right, JC?
Yeah,
right.
That is exactly what we're going to do.
And then we're going to the ranch, the farm.
Ah, the big ranch.
The big ranch farm.
But I say, the harder it is to let go of the system.
Today we are here trying some South African beers. For anyone wondering, we are doing serious studies here. This is just part of the cultural aspect of South Africa.
A deep color beats hard through my heart, and sound seems to tear it apart. But I should not waste all my time.
So now we're here at Mark and Natty's house. Natty's dad came from Thailand and wanted his own place to stay, so he built a house in the backyard.
The red and the strings that it be, the piece that I hold in my pieces alive. And I know that it's part of my home, and I know that I'm not so good. But I say, the harder it is to let go of the system, to let go of the system.
It's called a sambusa. I like that. Yeah, but it tastes like a taco. Taco Thursday.
I let go of the system, yeah. I let go of the system, yeah. Today